guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be starting my vlog for reading Middlemarch by George Eliot. Victober is not over. I did just barely finish off my last Victober vlog and went straight into this, so clearly still going hard with the Victorian literature, and it's just great. I am so excited to pick this up. I have not started it yet, but I've just heard so many good things. I know Kate Howe really liked it. I believe, even though Katie from Books and Things doesn't really love George Eliot, I think she's at least more okay with Middlemarch. Milena from Milena Reads really enjoyed Middlemarch. I have a friend in real life who I really respect and love who has read Middlemarch and also really enjoyed it. And Kieran from Katie Books ended up throwing, I think it was a cinnamon roll at it.
Finished debate.
Normally I kick a book and people seem to think that I'm damaging it, so instead I have a delicious homemade cinnamon bun. I've spent 6 hours making these, and now I'm going to throw it at this stupid bloody book, because this is a 1 out of 10.
What? So for me, that bodes pretty well for this particular work of Victorian literature. I am buddy reading this actually with Emily from Novelle Novels. Super excited to read with her. I think we're reading like 20, I can't remember exactly. I think it was around 20 something pages, 22 pages, or 22 chapters, excuse me, a week. So between Tuesdays, since we're starting the month on a Tuesday. And yeah, that's how I've broken this up. All the green is where we're doing each week. And then I've made the blue each week to mark what I would read each day. I actually probably won't be starting this until tomorrow. I'm just kind of taking a break from reading a little bit today just because I've just been reading so much with Victober, which I don't mind, but I do need a little bit of a breather today, I think. You know, just take time to watch things instead of reading them. So that's what I'm going to do today, but I will be starting this tomorrow. And I will update you as soon as I start feeling like I have strong feelings about anything, or even just to introduce after the first few chapters how I'm feeling about it to start. So yes. Hey guys, so I just filmed a bunch of videos and I thought I would update you on my Middlemarch vlog, and I actually probably should introduce my just general vlog for this next couple of weeks. But Middlemarch, I have read the first like 40 pages and I'm really liking it. I really love George Eliot's writing. I found it was a lot easier to get into this time. That may be because I just read a lot of classics in Victober, so my brain's kind of been trained to think a little bit more that way. I will say though, there's a lot of paragraphs that are kind of bent more philosophical that I don't really know what is being said. I pick up enough that I generally know what is going on within those paragraphs, but there's a lot of sentences I'm just like, that's just going right over my head, but the words sound very pretty. And so even though I don't understand what's happening, I just love the process of reading it. Like the words feel so good in my brain. So that's been fun. I am really liking Dorothea as a character as far as she's very interesting. I don't know how well I'd get along with her in real life, but I do find her very interesting, and I like the comparisons between her and I think her sister's name is Cecilia? Just Celia, sorry. So anyway, I am really liking the dynamics between those two, and I'm curious to see how this continues. So that's really all my thoughts on the beginning. I just wanted to make this short clip because I have read the first 40 pages, so I wanted to give an idea of where I'm at with it, and I'm liking it. It's definitely like a quieter start as expected for a book this long from the Victorian era, but I'm really liking George Eliot's writing style, and I am kind of surprised at how fast it's getting into some plot points that I was aware of with marriages and stuff. I was not expecting it to get into that so fast. So that's been kind of nice, and it makes me curious to see what happens throughout the rest of this book. That is all I have to say right now. I just, wanted to give you my very first thoughts about it, and then I will update you once I have a little bit more to discuss. Hey guys, so it is November 9th, Wednesday, and I wanted to give some updates on my thoughts of Middlemarch after the first week of reading it. I'm currently on page 336, chapter 32. I haven't read 32, but I'm on 32, which is about a third of the way through the book, maybe even a little over a third of the way through the book, and I'm really, really liking it. It kind of is giving me a similar feeling to like The Way We Live Now, but this one's taking place in a more small town, country town sort of setting, whereas The Way We Live Now is set in London. But just the dynamics between the characters and just kind of what we're focusing on with each of these characters, they're all, I feel like Anthony Trollope and George Eliot are the best at creating characters that just aren't evil. They're all just their own people, and they all have different flaws, and maybe some of them you like better than others, but just because they maybe are more like yourself or less like yourself, whatever the case may be, something about them is more magnetic to you than other characters. But there's no bad guy. They all just feel like people, and I really appreciate that. I will say I feel like George Eliot waxes a little bit more philosophical, whereas I think Anthony Trollope waxes a little bit more psychological. That being said, they both do both of those things. They both philosophize, and they both are really great at studying the psychology of human beings, but I do feel like George Eliot's tone and kind of what she spends more time on is more life philosophy, whereas Anthony Trollope, I think, spends most of his time really building up these characters just by what they're thinking and what they're saying and how they're feeling, as opposed to in this, it's very like, why are they feeling this way, or they are feeling this way, but it's like an extra long explanation, if that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't, but anyway. Some highlights: I really like Dorothea, like everybody else, I think, and her and Ladislaw are really interesting. I do keep getting Ladislaw and Lidgate confused. I'm starting to figure them out more in my mind now, but the first few chapters, that was getting a little confusing, but I think I've got it now. We've got Ladislaw and we've got Lidgate. I do like both of their characters. I think one of my favorite characters is actually Mary Garth. I like the Garth family in general, but specifically Mary Garth, I really like her almost as a foil for Dorothea in a lot of ways. There's kind of this sense that Dorothea grew up with so much privilege in her life that, not that her life has been without trial, I just feel like she's kind of lived in this position where she is able to help other people and serve them, and so she kind of romanticizes the idea of serving other people. Not that it's bad what she wants to do, it's just more like she's romanticizing it. She's not looking at the realities of it and what is actually needed for some of these people and why it's needed for them. Like, it's not just for you to be kind, it's because they really need it. Whereas Mary Garth is in a situation where she has lived in a much more poor situation, and so while she appreciates other people treating her well, she also is very realistic and recognizes that she can't be driven by her emotions, that things she needs to think through about how things will actually turn out, the reality of things. Like with her relationship with Fred, she clearly cares about him, but she recognizes that he is kind of lazy. He relies on other people to pay his bills and just spends money willy-nilly without thinking about anything at all with it, really. And Mary, despite her emotions, she knows that that sort of marriage won't actually bring her happiness ultimately, because a lifetime is a long time. Meanwhile, Dorothea jumps right into this marriage that she thinks will allow her to do everything she wants to do, but she's not really looking at the reality of who this person is and what's actually feasible to life. She turned him into a god when really he was just a man, and she didn't get to know him as a human being very well before she jumped right in and decided to marry him. And to be honest, he didn't really recognize her as a real person either. He saw her as almost like a pet, like someone who can just be there and be company and do whatever she's supposed to do as a wife, and he just didn't really think through the fact that she was also a human being with real emotions and with real desires and dreams, and he was going to be a part of that if he chose to marry her. So very interesting dynamics between all of these characters. I also am very impressed with a lot of the older people in the town, Bulstrode and Featherstone and Mr. Vincey, as well as Mr. Brooke. They all could have become very similar characters, and George Eliot really made them all very distinct. Like, they have some similarities, and I've had to take some time to get used to the names and figure out who is who. And I honestly still don't 100% have it in some ways, because I have been listening to this a little little bit on audiobook, and with names, with plot points and stuff, it's easier for me to understand while listening and to connect with it. But with names, it's easier for me to remember those when I see them on the page. So there's a few that I'm still kind of mixing up, but I can at least tell that they do all have distinct personalities. There's just so many of them that I've been introduced to in such a short time that I kind of lose track sometimes. But I do really like that they all feel very distinct and, like I said, like real people, and I'm really, really liking it. Not sure how Emily's feeling about it. I did message her yesterday on Voxer, but she still has not yet responded, so I will probably try to reach out to her on Instagram and just let her know I used Voxer to send her something. She may be busy too, like I don't. Life happens. It's also the holiday season and sick season, honestly, so don't know what's going on with her, but I'll try to check in with her and see how she's feeling about it. But like I said, I'm really liking it. Third of the way through already. It's crazy that I was able to get through that much already. But yeah, really liking it, like I said, and I will update you probably, unless something happens that I really need to talk about immediately. It will probably be just a weekly update with this, just so that this vlog isn't terribly long. But like I said, I could, if there's something I need to talk about, like with Bleak House, there were a few times I was like, I just need to say something about this. So that's possible. But anyway, that is the plan for now. Hey guys, so I really need to do this update. It's actually Wednesday of the next week after the last clip that I did. So I am currently at chapter 52, page 552 in my copy, and I'm still really enjoying it. Honestly, I feel like I don't even remember what I said in my last clip, so sorry if some of this is redundant or repetitive, but I'm just gonna go for it. So I think I did mention that I really like Mary Garth's character, that I like Dorothea. I'm at a point where Dorothea's situation has changed. Without giving spoilers, her situation has changed, but there's still some roadblocks for her and what we all the readers, I'm sure, would like to see happen in this book. And it's very interesting. Her whole relationship with her husband is just so fascinating to me, just because she really is great. Like, she just genuinely wants to be a good wife, and she wants to show her husband that she cares about him, but she also still wants to be true to herself. Like, she doesn't want to change who she is, and she never really does. She stays true to herself. She's just not getting anything in return, and that's the issue with the marriage, is that Casaubon, he's treating her as an object that he possesses. Even when they first, got engaged, it was about him and him being able to have a wife as opposed to getting married to this woman, whereas Dorothea, she kind of over-idolizes him, and that's kind of her issue at the beginning of this, but she quickly realizes the mistake, but also still wants to make the best of it. But because he treats her as an object to be possessed rather than a real person with real emotions and thoughts, it just causes issues. Beyond Dorothea, I'm very curious to see how is it Rosalind or Rosamund? I can't remember what Lidgate's wife is named. Okay, it's Rosamund. I'm very curious to see her relationship with Lidgate and how that continues to develop, because they're very sweet with each other, but they still just have very different expectations about life and how they use their money and how they approach public matters. And so I'm just curious to see if it stays strong or if there's some issues that end up cropping up because of their differences of perspective on life. Rosamund is just more focused on material things, focused on relationships with people, with wealthy people, with attractive people, whereas Lidgate is more about his profession. He's focused on his desire to serve people, as well as making great discoveries. He wants to be well known, and he's willing to do whatever it takes, even dealing with rejection and hate, as long as it ends with him discovering something that's really important. So because they just have these different perspectives and outlooks and goals, it will be interesting to see how that ends up coming together. It's actually been a while since we've had much interaction with Mary Garth and Fred. It's been at least several chapters, several days worth of listening to this since I last heard about what's going on with them. So hopefully they'll crop up soon in the next section or two, because I would love to know what's going on with them. I really, like I've mentioned before, I really find especially Mary Garth interesting, so I'd like to see more about the Garths in general, really. I like the Mr. and Mrs. Garth as well. I think they're also very interesting. So yeah, that's really all I have to say in addition to what I believe I have already said. It's a really great book. I'm really loving it. I feel like because I don't have much specific to say that it may come across as like I'm not overly impressed, but I'm really, really liking it. I'm liking a lot about it. I look forward to listening to the audiobook / physically reading it when I get the chance, which hasn't been much, unfortunately, but that's okay. But I do really look forward to reading it often, and yeah, so it's one I'm really loving. Already I can say it's probably going to be on my favorites of the year, and I'm very excited to see how the rest of it goes, because there's a lot of things that I just feel like are being built up, but we haven't quite reached any climactic points yet, maybe in a few cases, but most of it has been a lot of build up with this town and the characters and their different issues and potential issues that could be coming up. So I'm excited. I feel like this next week I'm going to get into some pretty dramatic things, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward, I mentioned the Garths I really want to see, and I kind of mentioned that I want to see Fred as well, but more specifically with Fred, I am curious to see what he ends up doing with his life now that some of his hopes maybe are a little bit dashed, and so he has to kind of reevaluate some things, and I'm very curious to see where that goes as well. So anyway, all that to say, I'm excited to see where it's going. I'm enjoying listening to it / reading it, and I'm very much finding a lot of comfort in the process of reading through this. It's just, there's something very cozy about it. Maybe it's just the Victorian literature feel of it, but also I just think the characters and their dynamics are just interesting and have a coziness about them that's just wonderful. I'm just really, really liking it. So that is my update for this week. I will update you if I end up having something I really need to say, or just next week once I get through our next 22-ish chapters, I think is what Emily and I are reading. I can't remember exactly. But yes, once I get through that, I'll update you for sure, and I'll update you earlier if I have more to say. Hey guys, Editing Tori here. I just wanted to make a quick note that from here on out, I will be going into more spoilery territory. So if you have not read this and you want to avoid any spoilers, know that this is probably where you should end. So thank you for watching if you've watched this far and are going to leave. And for the rest of you who have read it or don't care about spoilers, I will be getting more into detail in this next little bit. So hope you enjoy. Hey guys, so different background, but not necessarily better lighting. So that's just where we're at right now. It is Thanksgiving today, and I realized I have not updated you on Middlemarch this week since my last week of reading. So I thought I should probably do that. I just reached book 8, so that's where I'm at right now. I will be finishing in the next few days, and I'm still super enjoying it. And some newer thoughts. First of all, this section, the longing that was in this section between Dorothea and Ladislaw, there were a couple of scenes that just got my heart racing. It just got me so excited. Of course, they didn't necessarily end with the resolution of the tension, but that's the point. We're going to have a lot more pages of tension before we can get that delightful union of people that we just want to be together. So I've been really, really liking that. Something else that has stood out to me in the past little bit is Bulstrode. I'm going to be honest, I was a lot more interested in Lidgate and Rosman, and then Dorothea and Casaubon and Ladislaw and their situation than I was in really anybody else in the town. Okay, Mary Garth and Fred I was also interested in, although we didn't really get very much of them in this section. We got some. There was some longing there as well. And we have a new introduction of a love triangle with Fairbrother, which I thought was very fascinating, and I'm very excited to see how that comes together. But Bulstrode, while there was some level of interest in him just as a person, I kind of tuned out a little bit during some of his portions. Like, I just didn't care as much. But there's been some interesting things that have come up, especially yesterday. My reading yesterday included where Raffles dies. And so that was very dramatic and interesting. George Eliot is just one of those authors I can always trust to have a nice domestic story that all of a sudden is marred by really tragic and intense things. And so that definitely happened. I'm very curious to see how that all comes together with Ladislaw and everything as well. Bulstrode at this point is kind of being chased out of the town, and he just as a character is very fascinating. Like, he really reminds me, I think I mentioned before that this kind of has reminded me of The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope, and he's kind of similar to Melmotte. Is that his name in The Way We Live Now? I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, that main character in The Way We Live Now, Melmotte, who kind of falls into a similar situation as far as things from his past coming up, people discovering things about him, and kind of his fall from grace. And I think Bulstrode has a similar feeling, although Bulstrode is a little bit more driven by religious fervor, I think I would say. I mean, not to an extent, I mean, he's not in the church or anything, but desire to be seen as a moral person and someone who is doing what God would expect him to do. And so everything he does, he's interesting though, because he'll do things that are clearly not okay, but in his mind, he kind of twists it in a way that makes it like, oh, but this actually is a moral thing to do because of this. Although I think what he just happened with Raffles, he really can't talk himself out of. He knows that it was wrong, but he just kind of has embraced that he doesn't care a little bit. I mean, he does on some level. It's definitely impacting him, but I think there's kind of a sense of he cares more about his image than he does about the morality behind what he did, and I just think that's really fascinating. Some other things that have come up. First of all, Lidgate and Rosman, I was right, they're not doing well. I really didn't expect them to, although it's made me really sad to see Lidgate's kind of fall, I guess you could say, although at the end of this last chapter, Dorothea talks about how she wants to help Lidgate be proven innocent with Mr. Fairbrother, and so that's kind of the mission they're on now, which I really like. I'm really excited to see how that all comes together for them. I'm very curious to see how Lidgate and Rosman end up. Rosman is just a very selfish person, and it's really sad to see Lidgate, who he has his own level of selfishness, I would say. I mean, a lot of what he does, he's more concerned about making a name for himself by making discoveries as opposed to really helping people as a doctor. So there is some level of that, but he also does have a good moral direction. Like, he knows what's right. He has a lot of self-respect. He also has a lot of respect for people in the town despite the fact that they don't treat him very well, and I really appreciate that about him. But we've definitely seen a huge fall in him, but at the same time he does want to make his marriage work. He does want to have success. I just think he did approach it in a very idealized way. Like, he expects everything in marriage. He expected to have a wife who just doted on him and supported him in everything, to this extent that she was literally just there to support him as opposed to him supporting her. And so I do think that he went into this marriage with unrealistic and very self-centered expectations with Rosamond, but Rosamond is the same way, and I feel like just both of them having their different expectations out of life, but also different expectations of how their marriage should work, both basically wanting to be the center of everything, is just really difficult to watch. That being said, I do feel like I respect that Lidgate wants to work with his wife. Like, when he's in a position, we see a lot in especially classic novels of this time, the men not really explaining to their wives what's going on until it's too late. And I feel like Lidgate, he kind of does that, but he does talk with her a little bit more about things. He wants to have discussions with her. He wants to involve her in these discussions, but she just wants things to go her way, and she's upset when they don't. And so I would say between the two of them, Lidgate is making more of an effort to try to make the marriage work and try to show respect to her than she is to him. She just does not care about him as a human being. He is someone to provide her with pleasure, and that is it. And it's really sad to watch, so I'm very curious to see how that comes together. If George Eliot has one of them be killed off, or if they just end with them maybe being on the up and ups, their marriage is getting better because they're working together, or if they just kind of end with, yes, maybe Lidgate's name is cleared in the town, but between the two of them with their marriage, they are just kind of unhappy still. I'm very curious to see how George Eliot brings that together. Something else I wanted to mention, I'm surprised that Celia and Sir James haven't played as much of a role in this book as I would have expected. They're some of the first characters we meet, and they seem to Sir James I didn't actually expect to be that important, but after he married Celia and things like that, I expected them to have a little bit more of their own subplot line, but they just really haven't. They've just kind of been hanging out. There's definitely the sense that Sir James is still kind of more in love with Dorothea, which is really sad to watch. And maybe for him, it's more of just a pride thing still, but there's kind of this sense that he maybe isn't as into Celia. There's not as much interactions between the two of them. He's not very interested in their child is kind of what's put out there. And yeah, it's very interesting. I wish that we got a little bit more of them so I could understand their dynamic and their relationship better. And maybe by the end of this we will. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's a really great book. I'm really, really liking it. George Eliot's writing is just so lovely. I've been able to get into it a lot better with this book than I have with some of her others, which has been nice. I think the audiobook has also been helpful, not only to allow me to read other things besides this, but also just because I'm more of an audible learner anyway, and so hearing things helps me to understand things better often than reading them. Not enough to make it so I don't physically read it all, obviously, but it is beneficial, and so I think it's definitely been beneficial with this. Definitely in the future when I revisit this, I'd like to physically read it and maybe take a bit more time so that I can physically read it while physically reading other things. But anyway, all that to say, really enjoying this still, and I am so excited to see how everything ends up with these characters, with this town. Maybe at the end of this I'll need to rank my favorite characters in this. I still really like Mary Garth, although I feel like she's kind of taken a bit of a sideline, which has been kind of sad. I feel like we're still learning a bit about her storyline here and there, but I feel like she's taken a sideline even within her own subplot line, because I think there's more focus on Fred and Mr. Fairbrother than on her as a person, which has kind of made me sad. I had hoped for a little bit more from her. Really, the Garths in general, I feel like have kind of taken a sideline a little bit, although Mr. Garth I think has been showing up a bit more. Dorothea obviously is very central to most of the plots. Lidgate and Rosman, I would say Dorothea and Ladislaw, and then Lidgate and Rosamond, and then Bulstrode are probably the main characters, which I guess makes sense because on the back of my book those are the names that are mentioned. So, but those are the ones I feel like have been focused on the most. With everything else kind of being side plot lines. I will say there's a few members of the town that I'm having a hard time distinguishing between, mostly the different ladies in the town when they're gossiping. I'm kind of losing track of who's who in a way that makes it so that, I guess they're kind of mostly just the gossiping ladies, so you don't really need to know too much about him, but I feel like because this book is called Middlemarch, I want to know more about everybody in Middlemarch. So maybe next time I read this, I'm going to kind of focus a little bit more on the characterization of all of the characters and not as much the plot. This time, obviously, I'm focusing a lot more on kind of the more surface level plots and subplots, and then the kind of main characters because it's my first experience with it. But it is one I'd love to revisit and kind of go deeper into Middlemarch as a town and all of these different people that are making it up. Not only the main characters, but also some of the others that maybe haven't stood out to me as much this time around. I think that could be a really interesting experience. But anyway, that's all I have to say now, and I will be finishing this, like I said, Monday probably, and I'll let you know at that point what my final thoughts are. Hey guys, so I've been slacking, and I did finish Middlemarch yesterday and just did not finish this vlog with it. So I loved it, gave it 5 stars. It was great. I really love Dorothea. I love her so much. I'm not as interested in Will Ladislaw, I will say that. I felt like he didn't have much of a character growth. I feel like he was just kind of there to be with Dorothea, which I thought was kind of disappointing, but it wasn't like disappointing enough to obviously take it down from a 5 stars for me. Still loved it. I found Lidgate and Rosman's situation to be fascinating. I'm just always fascinated by the way marriage is explored in classics, particularly because at the time it was so hard to get a divorce, that the way people handled their marital situations is always just fascinating to me. I am one that I believe any marriage can work as long as both partners are willing to try to make it work and compromise. But that's the thing, is both partners have to be willing to do the work, and often that's not the case, and that makes it really difficult. Due to the fact that I've been thinking about the relationships between women in Victorian literature, the conversation between Dorothea and Rosman was a delight, and I really found it fascinating that the one person who was able to get through a little bit more to Rosman was Dorothea. I just think that's really interesting due to their differences of personality. Like, it was an interesting conversation to watch. Bulstrode and his situation, as well as his relationship to his wife, I also found very interesting. I feel like Mrs. Bulstrode was like a secret great character in this that I didn't realize how great she was until the end of this, and then I really realized her quiet strength and her just awareness of people around her and her love of her family, and I just really appreciated that exploration. Besides Will Ladislaw, the one other complaint I have about the book is I wish that there was more development in Mary Garth's story, as well as just like Fred and Mr. Fairbrother. I feel like there was something to be desired. Like, I feel like we got all these pieces of a great story for their subplot line, but it just didn't really develop. Like, we kind of forgot about them for a huge chunk of the ending, the last several chapters, and then we kind of get the round out of that situation in the very last chapter, but we don't really get to experience much development in that storyline when there was a lot of promise there, especially with Mr. Fairbrother's part in that. Their kind of like love triangle, I feel like could have been expanded and developed more and made more interesting, because I feel like, you know, nowadays it's a big thing to not like love triangles, but I often think that is because people, like, they're not well done nowadays very often. Love triangles in recently published works tend to just have a lot to be desired. There's usually the one that you're like, obviously they're going to end up with this person, the other person is just there to be a roadblock for really no reason, and they just end up not being as interesting as they could be. But in classics, they're fascinating because there's so much more involved in marriage and romance than just passion, as in a lot of books nowadays. You know, there's financial stability, it's kind of a business transaction in a lot of ways as well, so there's a lot going on there. I also feel like Mr. Fairbrother and Fred, I feel like there was a sense that it really could have been either of them, that Mary could have accepted either of them, but I feel like George Eliot didn't build on the tension that was put there as to who Mary would end up choosing and why she would choose him. It just kind of ended up being like she and Fred both kind of figured out that Fairbrother had a thing for her, but she was like, well, I just love Fred, so there's that. I feel bad for making Mr. Fairbrother feel bad, but like, that's just the way it is. And there just could have been more to that subplot, and especially for how long this is, I feel like there were a lot of portions that could have been given to that subplot rather than to what they were devoted to, that time was devoted to. So that is one complaint I have. Again, not enough to tear it down from being a 5 stars, because I still loved Dorothea and Lidgate and Rosamond and Bulstrode, kind of the main plot lines of this story, enough that they were 5 stars on their own, and the other things, even though I would have liked a little bit more, and I feel like this could have really shown out if there was a little bit more in that plot line. It still overall was an incredible read. I'm so glad I got to it. I will say, I actually think if I were to rank the 3 George Eliot books that I've read so far, I would say I actually would put Adam Bede first. I think I'm a tragedy girl. It's just the way I am. And this is a little bit more domestic than Adam Bede. I mean, there's some like drama, pretty intense drama with Bulstrode and Raffles, of course. But Adam Bede just has a lot more tragic elements to it, and it's just my thing. It's just my thing. So I think I like Adam Bede a little bit more, but this is a close second, and then Silas Marner is third, but I still love Silas Marner. So I've loved everything I've read by George Eliot so far. I just think Adam Bede is my favorite so far, but this was amazing and will be on my favorites of the year for sure. So that is it. That is my experience with Middlemarch. Please let me know down below your thoughts on Middlemarch if you've read it. If you have any questions about anything, my thoughts on anything, please feel free to ask. I would love to answer. I hope you are having a wonderful holiday season, a great reading week, and I will see you next time. Bye!